Hey, welcome to Conscious Conversations. My name's Luke McLean. I'm the host and I'm a meditation teacher and I'm a life coach. And I use this podcast as a platform to try to raise a consciousness in how we can live by catching up with people that are doing really good stuff, who are living from a really authentic place and a purposeful and meaningful place, and trying to, unpack their story a little bit, but also get some of the tools and resources and thoughts that have got them on this journey to not just be really fulfilled and feeling like they're doing meaningful work, but to be successful in that. So that's the whole purpose of the podcast, and catching up with people around wellness, mindfulness, leadership, all sorts of areas where we can and need more authenticity, more realness, more kindness, compassion, and those kinds of things. So that's what we do with the podcast. It's really important for me. It's an avenue for me to, have a voice, but also to give people a voice. And that's the most important thing. So that's really what I'm trying to do with this podcast, and really create a mini movement within that and trying to wake people up a little bit more. And this week's no exception, because I get a chance to sit down with Kate Rizzo. And Kate was the founder of initially a company called a program called The Kindness Effect, which is now the Grow Club, where Kate goes and works a lot with schools, school kids, and talks about the importance of our relationship with ourselves, but the importance of self-care, of loving kindness, of compassion and gratitude, and how to have a better relationship with our emotions, and how to normalize those negative emotions that we have, but build a relationship that we can really coexist with some of those thoughts and stories that we tell, and understand them better. And I think this is such a need for not just students, but for everyone in society, is to build a better relationship and a more authentic relationship with the self, and find out what we're really after. Like, what's our real purpose? Where do we get meaning? What are the real connections we need? And it starts with us. We need to do the self-work. So we discuss that a lot today. I really like this episode. If you're into mindfulness, if you're a parent, if you're a teacher, if you're just wanting to sort of understand a bit more how it works and some of the tools and ways you can do that, I think this is a really good podcast. If you want to check more out of me, it's lukemclean.net or Luke McLean Mindfulness on Instagram. As I said, I'm a meditation teacher and I'm a life coach, and I run meditation workshops, classes based in all sorts of areas, from leadership to personal development. And I work with people one-on-one a lot to work with them to use mindfulness and meditation to develop, to grow, to become clearer, to slow down, to become calmer, to learn how to use skills like compassion and vulnerability with themselves, but also in their relationships with other people. So inadvertently, the work that I do is often around performance and growing people. So if you're feeling like you're developed, you need developing, you're a little bit stuck, I'd really love to talk to you. I think that meditation practices and mindfulness-based practices are really important in modern life, because it's very noisy. Our stories and the chatter we've got in our minds is super loud, and it's really hard to navigate who we are and what we stand for when it is that noisy and we're so reactive. So if we can drop some of that reactivity, create what's so important is space, then we can choose responses. Then we can choose how we show up in relationships. Then we can choose how we make decisions from a more authentic and real place. But when everything's so full, busy and rushed, we're really in that high stress environment. It's hard to perform it and be the person we want to be. So that's the work that I'm doing a lot more of. And that's my coaching, that's my workshops, and that's a lot of the essence of my meditation classes, is to help people create what I call the 3 C's of clarity, calm, and compassion. So that's me. Kate is at the Grow Club. I'll send all the links to her in the show notes. So don't stress. Just check out the show notes and you can get links to everything she's up to, because she's doing some really amazing work. So without further ado, this is Kate Rizzo. This is Conscious Conversations, and I really hope you like it. Welcome to Conscious Conversations. My name's Luke McLean. This week, really excited to sort of dig back into self-care, compassion, gratitude, and mindfulness, and really got exploring that and sort of looking at my Instagram feed a while ago, and sort of found this this feed that I really connected with, and thought that I'd touch base with the founder and explore what she's doing and what's happening, especially around that in the schools. So really excited this week to have Kate Rizzo from the Grow Club. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you. Hi.
So yeah, I'm fascinated. I sort of read up a little bit about your journey, and then had a chat with you on the phone.
Yes.
And thought we'd start at the start, but you're a psychologist by...
I'm a social worker by trade. I'm trained in psychology, but
Right.
I'm not a registered psychologist.
So social worker,
Yeah.
trained in psychology.
Yeah.
And what was interesting with the conversation we had, Kate, is sort of you started and got trained up, did what you needed to do, and then really felt that you wanted to do something meaningful
More
with it.
Yeah.
Can you explore a little bit about what that's like? So many of us train up or go on a journey, but actually don't know what that looks like towards the end.
So true.
And what were those stories, and what were those things that were playing out for you?
Well, I spent 5.5 years at university studying, and you study for so long, and then you get out and you kind of go, well, what really now? There's this disconnect, I think, between education and the real world sometimes. And I spent some time overseas in places like South Africa, and I came back and I just kind of had a bit of a pessimistic view of the world, and I wanted to change that because I am quite naturally an optimistic person.
Can you just tell us what played out? Like, I've been to South Africa a few times. What sort of played out then when you went overseas and got a bit of a broader view?
Yeah. Well, I grew up traveling with my family to a lot of, Bali, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. So I was always open to other cultures. But I went to South Africa. It was my first solo trip. I was 21, 22, and just I taught in a lot of the townships. So very, very poor, not a lot of resources, and yet there was this joy and this zest for life and this gratefulness. They were just really happy from what I saw anyway. Yeah. And I kind of came home, and I've lived a privileged life. And I was looking at all my stuff in my room, and it was around Christmas time, and my family was worrying about all the food, and there was more food than we needed. And I kind of had this moment of, what is all this crap for, And there was just a real disconnect between these two different lifestyles and these just a feeling, and I kind of felt really discontent and a bit, as I said, pessimistic, or just a bit like, what is the point of it all? And then it was probably 6 months later though that I really realized I want to have some kind of positive impact on the world and help create change. And that's where it all started. But it started very different to kind of what it looks like today. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting part where you go to these places that have a lot less materially, or even from a status perspective. Yeah. But their happiness is equal or often higher than what we see here through behaviours and through things like gratitude, things like kindness, giving, that it does, when you come back, make you think that we do have it a little bit backwards, or something's not quite right.
It's a disconnect.
Yeah, so I do relate to that. Yeah. When you say that. That interesting what you said then too about the feeling, like there was a feeling, but then it took about 6 months. Was that sort of a feeling where that needed to wash over you for a little bit to really sort of sink in and
I was just going to say it needed to sink in, and I think I needed to process it, and I was still young, and I think I was in my 4th year of study anyway, so I wasn't quite finished. So it probably started just before I finished my bachelor's, that feeling of, there was this disconnect between what I wanted to do and what was happening in the world, and the way people were living, the way people were treating each other in a country where there was so much wealth, so much material, just a lot, so much. And yet I think people felt alone, disconnected, misunderstood, not really content. So, yeah.
Where do you think they, like now, 4 years on or 5 years on, where, like, can you put your finger on where that comes from?
It's a good question. It's a very philosophical question. And, I feel like I believe different things around the answers to that question, whether it's like a spiritual point of view, a personal point of view, a professional point of view. But I think, and based in my study in psychology, we turn around 4 or 5 years old, and that sometimes a bit later, around 6 or 7, and we start to see the world differently. Yeah. We start to realize about consequences, about status, about reputation, about being a good little girl, being a good little boy, being a good little kid. And kind of around that age, that's when the layers start to come on. Have you heard the onion, the layer? Yeah. So we start to put the layers on, and then it's really hard to take them off. So we look for happiness and contentment and security in things like other people, relationships, jobs, status, material things. Yeah. And that's as young as even, competitions at school, like whether it's sport or whether it's like spelling and math stuff. We look for status, and I hate the word power. And I don't think a kid acknowledges that it's power, but we look to feel good externally. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I think
we look for happiness in the wrong places, I guess.
Does it come from a perspective of our human, this is probably a really good person to ask. We want to feel seen, heard and valued at our most fundamental level. So if being a good sports person is our pathway to be seen by our parents or to be seen by society, then that's
nothing really wrong with that.
So to get that requires to win games, to be the best player. So that attachment to status is our way to be seen, heard or valued that we've attached to.
And see, that on the surface seems okay. Doesn't seem like there's really anything wrong with that, or I don't even like to use the wrong, or maybe unhealthy with that. But then if we start to really slowly strip it back and go, okay, what if you get injured and you can't play anymore?
That's exactly right.
What's your identity? Yeah. Who are you? What if it was about becoming a father and having your family? And then what if something happens and you separated or something? Then who are you? Then where do you get your joy from? Yeah. So it's about, you can have goals and aims and want to win and want to grow, but your true sense of contentment and peace and happiness has to come from within. Yep. So then if something externally changes, you don't completely crumble and have no idea who you are. Yep. And unfortunately, I see that a lot in adults. Yeah. Most of my work is with teenagers in schools, but I've done a lot of work with adults, and I see how maybe a lot of their identity was a mum. And then, the kids leave the nest and she doesn't really know who she is anymore. Yeah. Or, a manager, and then they get injured and they have to resign or they have to take leave, and they don't feel strong or courageous or all the things that job gave them. So it's, how do you create those feelings without relying externally for that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I know in mindfulness, especially in sort of Buddhist teachings, it's the concept of you are not your thoughts. Yes. So that idea of the thoughts and beliefs you have maybe feel real, but it doesn't mean they're true. Yes. They're not all encompassing you.
Well, there's a great quote somewhere, and I probably put it on our feed on Instagram around don't believe everything you think.
Yeah, exactly.
And that, and I am really interested in a lot of the Buddhist teachings, and it's really interesting around what they say around thoughts and everything you just said. And that's what we try to teach in schools with young people. And just to answer your question about what Grow Club is, we are a mental health prevention service, and we go into schools and we teach emotional intelligence. Yeah, okay. So we don't go in and talk about anxiety or depression or mental health necessarily. We don't even really use those words, but we go in and we talk about your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your behaviors, and where they come from, and how to challenge them, and how to create healthy ones. We give kids like a toolkit, I call it, And in that toolkit, there's probably about 12 or 13 different tools that they can use depending on what they want or what they're struggling with. And it all is internal. So it's all about their thoughts, their feelings and their emotions. And it's really interesting because, you know, we go into classrooms with, let's say, year 9s or year 8s, so you're like 14, 15. And, you know, sometimes the world looks at young people and go, well, what do they know? And they're entitled and this and that. But these kids feel so much. Like there's just so much going on inside them. And I've found we're going to turn 6 next year. So I found over the last 5 years of doing this work, the moment you give them a safe place and a safe environment and you give them the opportunity to share and talk, they do want to be heard, as you were saying before, and they want to be seen. And they all feel alone. They all feel like they're the only one feeling like this. Yeah. And the moment everybody starts talking, it's like this sense of, everybody's feeling like this. Yeah. And there's this beautiful sense of connection. And even between kids that might have been labelled the bully or, you know, there's cliques at school and they don't all get along. It's been really beautiful to see maybe different groups connect through the things that they feel about themselves or they think about themselves. And, you know, I've seen girls say, well, I feel really ugly. I feel really horrible about my body. And then another girl says that. And the other girl goes, no, but I think you're so beautiful. And that girl goes, no, I don't feel beautiful at all. So there's this I think we just create really safe spaces for students to connect. And then we give them tools to go home with, which I think is the most important part.
Yeah, okay. How do you create those spaces? How do you create the first step to sort of open up?
I am a huge believer, and because I also teach at RMIT University, and I say to my students at the start of the year, I will never ask you to do something that I'm not going to do myself or that I wouldn't feel comfortable doing. So I guess traditionally it's like that lead by example, but also I believe in the power of storytelling. So I start all my workshops by telling these complete strangers some really personal stuff about what I was like at that age, how alone I felt, that I had a lot of change in my childhood. My parents divorced. We moved house so many times. I went to 4 different schools. I really struggled to make friends. And that you can see they're like, oh, well, she's sharing. She's being honest.
Yeah, okay. So, you create like a vulnerability loop. When you open up, they sense it, and then they open up because of that.
And I also always take other facilitators with me into my workshop. So there'll always be maybe 3 or 4 of us. And between all of us, we all have very different experiences. So once we've all shared, there's always something to connect to from one of our stories for the students in the room. And it's beautiful, some of the messages I get after the workshops or some of the kids coming up to us at the end, and just feeling that connection is really lovely.
For teachers, for parents, you know, how, when you do those workshops and when they're done really well and you feel that connection, what's the tension you hold between it being, you know, a clear framework of what you want to talk about and get across, but also just being in the moment and being really, I'm just going to, if I get a question or if I'm with 3 or 4 facilitators, this isn't a presentation or a prescription of I'm going to tell this story at this time of what happens.
Well, I think one of our differences to a lot of other services or businesses out there that might do this type of work is that we don't present.
Yeah.
We don't talk at the kids. We don't stand up at the front with like a PowerPoint, you know, with like, these are the 5 steps to reaching out when you're struggling. We're very authentic in the moment. We build an equal playing field. Yeah. We're all on the same page. And look, we have a workshop plan. We have outcomes and goals and activities, but we're also very flexible, and we often will go off that plan if, you know, there's been many times we've gone into a school and the school have said, we want you to focus on bullying and self-esteem, let's say. And then we go in and the students take it down a totally different path. And I go, well, this is obviously what's needed. Yeah. If this is what they're bringing up. So we go down that path with them. So we're very flexible and very organic in that sense. And I think the students can feel it because, there's nothing worse than you're having an open, honest conversation and somebody's sharing, and then you're like, okay, moving on to the next activity, and you're kind of shutting them down a bit.
And that's not just, I don't think, that's in life.
Yes.
Like that's
it's not. Any
relationship of when you're either over it and you've disengaged it, or you've got another agenda to get to, and just you're sort of presenting to get to here. And kids, I've got 5 kids.
I know, it's amazing.
I know that they are so connected. Like they know
beautiful.
when you're dismissing them. They know when you're patronising them.
Kids are so clever.
Like, and if you think they don't, right, they might be too polite or not feel safe enough to say it, but they know. Like,
I say to my students here at RMIT all the time, I say, guys, because I teach youth work, I say, guys, young people have a great bullshit radar. Yeah, they know when you're authentic. They know when you're not. And you know how that whole, but why, or just because, that doesn't cut it anymore. No. You have to explain and talk to, not at. And honestly, some of the young people I've met in the last 10 years are more wise and just inspiring than a lot of the adults I know. They're so willing to be open and vulnerable, and some of the stuff they've been through, and they're only 17 years old.
And their capacity to forgive, but also their capacity to take in. Like, we got Maple, who's 3, and we had,
how beautiful.
and she is, but we had her, and we took Cooper, Lily, and Bonnie, who were at the time, I think they might have been 5, 8, 9.
Mm-hmm.
So we took them to the birth, and they watched Maple get born.
Wow, that's amazing.
Completely. And they would ask the questions before on, where do babies come from, know, and we were honest with them.
That's
but once
great.
they watched Maple get born,
Yeah.
and they watched and took it all in. Like, there's no more questions. Like, there's questions about the birth, but they saw firsthand what happens.
Wow, that's amazing.
But they weren't shunned by it. They weren't distraught.
Yeah.
They actually now have a full understanding, and especially for Lily and Bonnie now, who know, okay, that's, if I have children, I know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And there's no guessing or secrets here.
Yeah.
And that really always surprised me because of they really wanted to be there.
They're sponges. They want to learn. Yeah.
And we sort of sometimes, I think we protect them from that. We'll tell them another story, or we'll tell them something that we think.
It doesn't really protect them.
No, I think it just makes them more curious and probably more disconnected if you won't give the real story.
And today, they'll go find the answers
that's what
else,
I mean.
And I think there's a lot of conversation in the news, and depending on kind of what your beliefs are around what's taught in schools, whether that's sexual health, whether that's respectful relationships. And there are a lot of people that are like, no, don't teach. I don't want my kids too young to learn about this or that. And really, we have to stop living from fear, out of fear, and we have to start leading with vulnerability and courage, because our kids are going to find out about it, and they're going to learn these things. Would you rather them learn it in a safe, open environment? Would you rather be the one that teaches them, or would you rather them find out from the internet or find out from a friend who doesn't really know either?
That's right.
And then there's miscommunication, and I think we see a lot of young people getting themselves into really unfortunate situations and bad decision making. And I sometimes think that really could have been that might not have happened with a really simple, open conversation. So I think that's great that.
And those, I think, in leadership, I think in teaching, I think you've got those moments where you can, like what I'd call a threshold moment, where you can build connection and really elevate that relationship. Or at that same time can build disconnection if you don't want to meet them where they are. And it actually is a chance to, separate that relationship or, diminish it.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Just yesterday I was talking to some colleagues of mine about an old boss and how we went to that boss with ideas about how to improve the team and how to change our communication. And this boss said, we don't have any communication problems. We're good. Right. And just shut us down. Yeah. And 6 months later, it all fell apart. Yeah. And I hope that person can look back and maybe say, that was a threshold moment, and I missed it. That was an opportunity for growth, for authentic communication, but because they shut us down and, it ended up falling apart, that project. So And I guess it's hard and people can feel maybe personally attacked or whatever it is. But I think that was that's a great example of a threshold moment kind of, but going the wrong way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Tell us about the work you do in terms of, we spoke before it started about this, it's about the self. So it's not, self-care, self-compassion.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you begin that message with the kids?
So one of the things we always talk about in our workshops is the inner critic.
Yeah. Okay.
So the voice in your head that tells you you're not good enough, you're not clever enough, you're not smart enough, you're not loved enough, whatever it may be. And we really dive into that. And it's really funny. A lot of young people might not know that terminology, the inner critic or self-talk or the little voice in my head. But as soon as we start to talk about what it says, they all connect and they know. And I go in with my own stories of my inner critic, and I tell them stories of when I was in grade 5 and got called dumb by my maths teacher, and then my inner critic started calling me dumb, and we have fun with it as well. Like I'll tell them some maybe funny or awkward moments that my inner critic was really loud, and then we get them to challenge the inner critic through mantras. Yep. Through mindfulness, through meditation, through journaling. We give them a number of tools, and we give them opportunities in the classroom to share, to give voice to their inner critic, because the inner critic grows and thrives through silence and shame. Yeah. So the moment we literally say it out loud, out of our mouth, and our ears hear it, it loses its little bit by little, it loses its control, and then we get them to challenge that and replace it with like a positive thought. And I don't want to be too sciencey with them or too kind of I'm not there to teach them the science of the brain, but I do like to tell them a little bit about how the brain works in terms of thoughts and how it's just like the body. The more you exercise a muscle, the stronger it gets. The more you think a thought, the stronger it gets, and the more at the front of the brain it stays. So if you can replace thoughts with positive thoughts, you got to train, you got to practice every day, but then that thought becomes the dominant thought. And so I like to give them a little bit of that background, and then we get into more activity-based stuff. Yeah,
it's such a good terminology, the inner critic.
A lot of the young people might say, oh, it's like the little devil sitting on your shoulder, or it's like the little voice in the back of the head that's always grumpy and angry. They have their own interpretations of what it is, but it's good to have certain terminology about it so they understand and they can go, that's not me right now, that's my inner critic, you know. And just like before, your thoughts are not fact. You can challenge them.
How much in that do you sort of work with them to sort of build that relationship and that knowing of when, the awareness, I guess, of knowing when the inner critic there's worry or there's shame?
We do a lot of examples, and we get a lot of them to share stories of particularly things they wanted to do but didn't, and then we identify where was the inner critic. So it might be something like, I wanted to join the netball team, but I felt like I'd make a fool of myself, or I'd look like an idiot because I'm not as good as everybody else. And then we identify, maybe that was the inner critic saying, you're going to look like an idiot, you're not as good as everybody else. Other people say things like, I find it hard to make friends. And we might say, what kind of the thoughts do you think when you're maybe around other friends? And they might say things like, they won't like me. Just some of the thoughts that are in their heads at certain moments, and we identify through getting them to identify moments in their life. Because it's hard to just, let's jump into the mind and start, so we kind of start in the real world in terms of certain events or situations. And when we ask kids to think about an uncomfortable situation, they can come up with plenty. Being a teenager is not fun sometimes, So they come up with heaps of examples, and then we'll take those examples in the bigger group and we'll pull them apart, we'll explore them, we'll see if anybody else connects to that example, which most of them always do. And then slowly we kind of dig deeper. Our workshops go for like a minimum of an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Most of our workshops are day long.
Yeah. Okay, nice.
So we have a lot of time to slowly dive into this stuff, because if there's one thing I can't stand is, and hope I don't offend any organizations here, is organizations that go really deep, really fast, and then leave.
Yeah.
And then the school the next day is like, we had 10 students not come today.
There's a mess.
Because you're disrupting all this emotional stuff, and then you're kind of leaving, you know. So we do it slow. We go deep, but we do it slow, and we bring them out and we leave them with not homework, but things that we want them to do for that week.
It's so important, I guess, to have a way forward, like a next step, rather. Because you do. When you work with it, and I know when I teach meditation classes, it's like you stir a lot up.
Oh, yeah.
And if you left it, that mess, it can be really tough for people.
Yeah. I always check in with schools a week later. They always have my email. They always have resources that I've left the teachers with, and the students are always left with resources and tools as well. And I always make an effort of connecting with like the wellbeing team at the school, because I always identify students in the workshops and say, oh, that person over there, that student over there, and I connect that with the wellbeing team. So there's so we kind of just don't come and...
So you're not just coming in,
boom, and
banging
then...
a workshop out and going, I'll see you later, or I'll see you next year.
Yeah, and a lot of schools we've been working with now, we have worked with every single year. So we have built, a 4 or 5 year relationship. So we have that continuity. We know maybe the culture of the school, or we know the issues at the school now. So that's been kind of quite comforting to know that schools want us to come back as well. So that says we might be doing something right.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit, Kate, about some that negative critic and that self-talk we get. Like, what's the antidote? Like, what's the thing that can help really
challenge it or change it? No.
Drop it, challenge it. Sort of, when we things that people think about, like what can really help, not just kids but parents.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is we have to be mindful. We have to know it's even happening in the first place. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't, because at school, you learn how to read, you learn how to write, you learn about the world, you learn about science. We teach kids everything else. Why don't we teach them to understand their inner world? Like I left school and even navigating relationships, navigating self-worth, your relationship with your body. Why do they think, they'll figure all that out, but we have to teach them English and science and math? There's this disconnect. So the first step is being aware. And if you're not aware, nothing's going to change. Like there's no point me even trying to give you an antidote if you aren't self-aware. So we start there as well with mindfulness, with journaling. Yeah. And when I've done work with parents or adults, we spend most of it on the just acknowledging and the awareness, because that's what most adults struggle with.
And that's, I think we take that, and people take, the thing that I find, people take that as a token. Like, okay, we're going to start with mindfulness, we're going to start with journaling, right?
And then, I know what you're saying. 100%.
But like what you said before is this is a practice. Like this is like training the body. So it's like if you read fitness magazines, you're not going to get fitter. Right?
Yes,
because just because someone said here they are, like that's not dropping the kilos.
It's so true.
So I think that's the bit people don't get, is that, and if we can practice, and takes work, takes training. Yes.
I don't say this so much in our work with teenagers, but whenever I do work with adults, I'm very honest with them, and I say, I don't have this one solution that's going to make your life perfect. You do it and you're all happy, everything's great. It is going to take consistent work every single day. And you're not going to get to a place where, I'm happy now, so I'll stop doing the work. No, you have to keep doing the work no matter how you feel. And it really does blow my mind how much resistance I've come up against with adults. And I kind of sometimes want to say, well, it's obvious nothing else is working, so why not give it a try?
And that's my thing. It's like, okay, but the reality is that, this shit in your head's pretty loud.
Yes.
It's pretty noisy. It's pretty negative.
And it follows you everywhere.
Yeah. And what you're doing right now is not helping it. If anything, you're training it to become
stronger.
louder.
Yes.
To be more negative.
I say to a lot of adults, and I use the analogy of you go to the gym or you, whatever fitness it is, you train your body and your body gets stronger. And I love that, you know, reading a magazine isn't going to make you any fitter. So why do we think that we don't have to put that same effort into our brain? Our brain is a muscle. And the way I love to explain the brain, and I get better at this every time I explain it, so I hope I'll do it well because I really used to explain it. But I think of the brain as like a really overgrown paddock of really overgrown grass and trees, and it's really hard to get through. And whenever you think a thought, you think that thought every day for more than 30 days, you create a pathway between like the neurons and the synapses. You create a pathway. So I imagine it of like you're going through this big paddock and you've got a lawnmower and you've gone through and you've mowed a really clear path from one side to the other. Now, next time you want to think, and that's probably a negative thought. It's probably a self, criticism thought going on there. Next time you want to think something positive about yourself or you want to feel good, there's already this really clean, clear path. Your brain's going to go, oh, it's easier to take that path than to mow a whole new path. So to answer your question about what the antidote is, it's about creating new thought patterns. And I say, neuroscience has shown in the last couple of years, you have to do something 10 minutes every day for 30 days for that new pathway, for that lawnmower to go through and build that new pathway in your brain. So whether that is journaling in the morning for 5 minutes and then doing some gratitude at the end of the day for 5 minutes, or as I like to say, one of the antidotes to your inner critic is mantras or affirmations. Now, I totally get people think whenever they hear mantra or affirmation, I am beautiful, I am strong. And, people might roll their eyes. It can be that, but often it's very specific to you. It's very specific to what your inner critic is saying. So for me, whenever I can be quite anxious. So one of my mantras is I am calm, I am capable, I am confident. And saying that maybe 3 times throughout the day for longer than 30 days, that starts to create a whole new pathway in the brain. And it's so funny because I've done workshops with adults and I've addressed it very sciencey. I've really pushed the psychology. I've really spoken about how the brain works, how patterns of thoughts and pathways, and people are like, I'm going to try this. Like, this sounds. And then I've done workshops where I haven't mentioned the psych part at all, and I've just really spoken about the mantras and affirmations, and people are like, oh yeah, this woo-woo, hippie, new age stuff, So I just find it all so interesting how closed people can be.
And there's so much now, like I'm, geeking out a little bit on that, but like you've got that default mode network that's in the brain that basically every thought we have about self and self-importance in our ass activates that part of the brain, which is it keeps us in this constant story about us, about
petrol.
And then the problem with that is we become so obsessed and connected with that story that it becomes the story.
So true.
And that we can't connect to another story. So we're in this internal thinking about us and how we show up, and a lot of it's negative, that we see someone struggling and we don't actually have the capacity to show empathy because we're stuck in this default mode network. So we can't go, I want to go and show compassion. Because I can't see the compassion because I'm stuck in my head right now, and that becomes problematic. And we're in Melbourne. I don't get to Melbourne that often, but there's so many people in this city, which is all energy. And this, you've got this choice for this energy to be compassionate, to be joyful, to be connected, or you've got the choice for it to be disconnected and isolated, depending on basically the quality of people's presence, awareness, compassion. And it's huge. It is.
And that's kind of my whole belief in the world, is that we have to work on ourselves first in order to be a good citizen, a good partner, a good family member, a good daughter, whatever it is. It's kind of got to start from within. But while you were saying that, I was kind of just thinking about stories and how we get stuck in our stories. And not too much through Grow Club, but through being a social worker, a lot of work I've done with clients is around stepping back from that story.
Yeah.
Because that has been who they are their whole life, And, I'm always very sensitive around mental health issues, but sometimes people, let's say they're struggling with depression, they become depression is their identity.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's not. You're a human being. You're a person, and you are suffering from something. Yeah, you are unwell, but that is not who you are at your core, and that can be really sensitive to challenge people around that. And I'm totally respectful of that, and I do it really slowly and gently, but getting people to understand their story can shift, their story can change, your identity or who you are is fluid. And some of the most transformative work has been around storytelling and letting go of your story. Yeah. And I was very much, I had my own story of who I was and stuck in that. And it took me a really long time to challenge that within myself. And there's even parts of my story now that I'm still trying to challenge or step away from, not in I don't want to feel this or I don't want to be that person, just in acknowledging who I am can be fluid, and it doesn't depend on external factors. And so much stuff happens to us when we're in our childhood, that then becomes who we are. Or dad left when I was 8. Yeah. That's part of my identity now. I have it's hard. I feel like I have to be really sensitive when I talk about this stuff, because I don't want to diminish that those external events have huge impact on our belief systems, our behaviors, our choices we make in life. But at a core level, those things are not who we are.
I think, yeah. And
not everybody agrees with that, and that's fine too, That's just my belief around storytelling.
I think stories are massive and
they're powerful.
And they're hugely powerful, and they've been in humanity since humanity started to send information and stuff. So an internal storytelling.
That's what I'm talking about here, the internal storytelling.
Is the internal, and for me, that open awareness. So that open awareness, in my perspective, is the ability to sit in open awareness and watch that story.
Yes.
Not to actually even get rid of it yet.
Yeah, just be aware that it's happening.
Step out of it and go, okay, there's the story of I'm not enough.
Yeah.
Right? It's not going anywhere, but I can watch it.
Yeah.
Okay, and I can just see it with a bit more curiosity in terms of when it shows up. And when someone says that, that's when that story comes.
Yeah. Or that I get triggered because of that story that I've been telling myself.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. And often that story might not go, and it's like when we name it, it might not go anywhere just yet. But when we can actually step outside it regularly and go, okay, there it is again. Yeah. It got me again. Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah. It's definitely okay. But it's just that awareness.
Without being in it all the time and so fixated to it.
Well, you've got to live life. You've got to get on with things. You can't be in this reflective state 24/7 either. But if you do just have that level of awareness, and I've had many moments where I've reacted instead of reflected, and then I've gone back and I've gone, I reacted because of X, Y, and Z. But at least I can acknowledge that. It doesn't change the fact that maybe I didn't react so well to that situation, or I took it really personal when it wasn't personal. But at least I can still acknowledge, reflect, and be aware, and then hopefully implement some change for next time. Because I also do. I know we're complex, and I know it takes us a lot of time to create change in ourselves as humans, but I also think that we make too many excuses sometimes. We get really stuck in our ways, and I really like this quote I heard recently about what you're not changing, you're choosing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think people might feel uncomfortable hearing that, because people don't want to take responsibility or acknowledge that, the power is all mine. Yeah. It's so easy to blame people, jobs, relationships, past experiences, than to take power back and say, I can shift my thinking. And, I'm really conscious. I'm sitting here, I probably sound like I'm got all my whole life together, and but just because I know all this stuff, I still struggle with it as well, I think I'm very self-aware, but I still struggle with my story and my inner critic.
Yeah. And that's for me, it's not, I don't think there's ever not going to be the struggle.
Mm-hmm.
It's reducing that struggle,
Yeah.
or even just being kinder in the struggle, like being kinder to yourself on, shit, you know, I got triggered today.
Yeah.
But tomorrow I can start again.
Yeah.
And it doesn't define me.
Yes.
And if I need to go and have a conversation with that person tomorrow and go, hey, sorry, but, you know, I got triggered. I responded in a way and, you know, are we okay?
And that's what it all comes back to, self-compassion. And that's what we were talking about before.
I think that's huge in everything we spoke about is if we can do it with self-compassion and kindness and when it gets really tough, but just show up in that way, it makes it easier.
Yeah. I'm actually really curious with 5 kids, how do you implement that self-compassion? Or do you try to teach your kids to have that level of, and I know they're obviously quite young, but is that something you
absolutely
focus on?
Yeah, I think self-care, self-compassion is really important. We'll sit around the table most nights and what did you do that was kind?
Oh, beautiful.
For yourself and for someone else.
Oh, beautiful.
What are you grateful for? And what did you think you did really well today that you're proud of in yourself? So,
that's
again,
lovely.
3 little questions, but for them to realise, but that's like, I think them just to be kind, and what I'm trying to do is to really notice when they're kind to themselves or when they're kind to others and call that behaviour out when it happens. So that was really kind. Well done.
Yeah.
Well, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Are you proud of what you just did?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And when they say, I was proud of that backflip on the trampoline, you should be. That was really good.
Yeah.
Trying to train the negative bias into more of a positive
Well,
bias.
if you're doing that every day or even every second day, that's creating a really healthy habit. That's creating really healthy pathways in the brain. And what a lot of people don't realize, or maybe some people do, the brain, you know, the last part to develop of the brain is the prefrontal cortex right at the front, around 25 years old. And that's the part that looks at reasoning, compromise, perspective taking. So understanding that you hurt someone else's feelings. And if a kid has been through trauma or neglect or doesn't have what sounds like an amazing dad and like you to do those things with them every night, certain parts of the brain don't actually develop. And I can't remember where I learned this. I was watching an amazing documentary on the mind, but they were saying how if a kid has never been taught self-love or to love themselves, or has been shamed, so if it's an external thing, so maybe they've been shamed about their sexuality, what they look like, whatever it is, the pathways in the brain that are connected to self-love literally don't form.
Yeah.
They don't exist. So you might be having to teach a 30-year-old something that is completely foreign to them. They don't even have the neural pathways there around that self-worth and self-love. And the science behind it is just fascinating, I think. It's so interesting.
It's massive. And the other thing I think on that topic is, you know, I still get triggered and I still sometimes yell on
same, of course.
to the kids.
Yes.
What I've found really important is to go and say sorry and to explain that, sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. What I was trying to do was get that across, and I'm sorry that I made you feel this way and that I made a mistake.
And how powerful is it when an adult apologizes to a kid?
Yeah. And back in my day, that didn't happen.
Oh, yeah. My parents have funny stories of,
very rarely would your dad say, sorry, I made a mistake. Yes. They might say sorry, but they wouldn't recognise the sorry for the mistake that it actually was and why they made it and that they didn't mean to make you feel that way.
Understanding the whole,
and what that has also done, I think it's important for us, is that our kids are getting better at, when they get upset, calling it out and going, Dad, when you did that, you made me feel like this.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Which is huge because then I can
really huge.
Get a bit of a read on, okay, I don't mean when I behave like that or when I say that or when I don't say that, I don't intend for that to be the outcome. So I've got to work on that.
Yeah, that's beautiful that your kids can even communicate that back to you.
Yeah,
you know?
But I think it's practice.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Definitely.
Back to the Grow Club and what you're doing, what else, you know, do you see as being sort of really important in the schools, especially? Like if you were going to give any advice to schools that were going to get you in to use your services or even as a culture, like what else are you seeing that's really important now with the kids?
There's a couple of things I think schools need to listen to their students better in terms of, the education system is an old system that has not changed for a really long time. Yeah. And I have so much love and respect for teachers. My whole family are teachers almost. Yeah. But the system that they are teaching within is quite old and rigid. And if you have this capacity as the school, whether it's resource, whether it's time, to, have more of a student voice and ask them what they need, that would be really powerful. Because unfortunately, but Grow Club has fallen into a category. A lot of schools are just booking us for their work with their girls.
Okay.
And we've worked with all cohorts, all year levels, and a couple of times I've gone and assumed it's a girls' school because they booked us for just their girls, and I get there and I see male students everywhere, and then I say to the coordinator or whoever it is that booked us in, what are the boys doing today? Oh, the boys are going for a bike ride. Yeah. Oh, the boys have normal class. Oh, the boys are doing. And it's really interesting. I always, when that's the case, I say to the girls, so girls, what do you think about the fact that the boys aren't here? And it's always 50-50. A lot of them love that they can just talk and it's just them and they don't feel the pressure of having the boys there. Yeah. But then at the same time they say, but the boys should be doing this too, whether it's just with their own group or whether it's all mixed. So I do have to say to schools, please, this isn't a gendered learning. Like, it's not just women that need to understand their thoughts and feelings. And in this new age of what does masculinity mean, it's really important to start teaching young boys to understand their feelings and what's going on for them. Yeah. So that's been a really big.
And although, and so much of that, depression and anxiety might be higher in women, but suicides in men is through the roof. Yes. And the reason is because
they don't even talk about it.
Yeah, they don't get to the point of being able to go, he's depressed and he's anxious. Yeah. He'll bottle that up until it gets to a point where it's too late. Yeah. And I do worry sometimes now that, and I think there absolutely needs to be a shift in how we see women. But we need to take men on that journey just as much as the women. And by isolating them, sometimes I think we're making it worse.
I read the most amazing, life-changing book this year. It's called For the Love of Men by Liz Plank. She's an American researcher, and it's about mindful masculinity. And it's pretty much this look at feminism and what masculinity means at the moment, but it's purely about men and their experiences. And it's really interesting because she's basically saying we expect men to be better, and that's fair, but we've never given them the tools. No. We've never given them the space to explore that. So it's like expecting a kid to make themselves dinner, but we've never taught them how to cook before. Yeah. That might be a really horrible analogy, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
And in it, she talks to men all over the world from lots of different countries. She's done a lot of research, and it really blew my mind around we can create a new future, but we have to provide tools and opportunities for everybody along that road. And what is really interesting, I found when I have done workshops with the whole schools, a lot of boys can identify that they know that their friend is struggling, or they can say, something's up with Tommy. He doesn't seem like himself. He seems a bit sad or flat lately, but they don't know what to do past that. Yeah. So that they're not silly. They can recognize emotions in themselves and other people, but they have no tools of how to support their friends or support themselves for that matter. Where girls, I guess traditionally have been taught to be caring and compassionate, and so they have a bit more of those skills when it comes to their friends.
And girls will naturally talk to each other about it and conversate more about those feelings, whereas men will naturally not talk feelings, and it will be how was the footy on the weekend and that. Yeah. And I think
the banter, the Aussie banter.
Yeah, the repetitive. And if anyone goes to that awkward place of heart, this conversation's going to stop pretty quickly because I don't have the tools or the ability to sit in that space at all.
I had one of the most heartbreaking moments about 2 weeks ago. I was doing a workshop with grade 5s, co-ed, and we did this activity at the end of the day around saying sorry and picking somebody in the room that it was about perspective taking. We're trying to teach kids to understand that they have impact on each other. And they had to pick someone to say sorry to. And they stood up in front of the class, and instead of like saying to me, oh, Kate, I want to say sorry to Bob for blah, 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 they would turn to that person and say it to them in front of the whole group. We had some girls do it. One of the kids even said sorry to one of the teachers. It's beautiful. And then we get to 2 boys, and one boy stands up and says, I want to say sorry to so-and-so. He stood up, and this kid wanted to say sorry for not playing with him and you're kind of ignoring him and not letting him be part of the group. And there was so much emotion between these 2 boys, and the kid that got apologized to, I could just see in his eyes, he was on the verge of tears. And at the end, I said, you guys want to hug it out? And they were walking towards each other and they were about to hug it out. And then this other boy went, no, boys don't hug. That's just something girls do. And the boys everybody started laughing. The boys got so awkward and they just sat down next to each other. And it was just a moment of, there could have been a moment of connection there and role modeling, and then the old stereotypes come smashing through the door and knock that opportunity of connection, you know? And I challenged them, and we spoke, and I said, no, come on, everybody can hug and show emotion. And we spoke about it a bit, but then like 3 or 4 other boys were like, no, just girls hug and, you know, they skip together, and boys don't do that. Boys are different. And these are grade 5 kids, and they're really aware of those social constructs of gendered roles. And I found that so heartbreaking. And it was at the end of the workshop. I had no time to dive into that, you know, and I followed up with the teachers about it, but they're ingrained stuff. That's going to take a long time to pull apart, you know. And
I think when I hear that, the more, and I don't like to use sport, but it's getting better. And when you watch, you know, a close game of sport, and then you see them win. I saw it yesterday. Was what just turned on, and the golf was on. But men hugging after celebrating the win. And it's no different that there's a commitment of connection together and hard work that they've and then there's what's happened afterwards. And that they actually want that physical touch and connection with each other to recognise each other for being supportive, for being with them at that moment. And that inclusiveness of wearing this together. Which is, and I think that potentially there's so much of an opportunity to get some footage or some video of a Dustin Martin or someone hugging each other and going,
like a typical masculine man, I guess. And then
these are your heroes, and these guys, they hug.
You know, there's this beautiful, I'm a big animal lover, and there's this beautiful program in America called Pawsitive, so P-A-W as in paw, like dog paws, and it works with men in jail and dogs that are on death row, so dogs that are going to be put down, have maybe attacked people, have been called a menace to society. This organisation gets these dogs, brings them into prisons all over America, and partners them up with a prison guy. And that man has to train that dog, they go through like 9 weeks of training.
Wow.
It is beautiful. If you look up just Positive, but spell the first 2 letters P-A-W on Instagram and Facebook, they're an amazing American organisation. But what the biggest feedback is that for these men that have been in prison for years, they haven't been touched. They haven't been hugged or held. And so many of them say it's got nothing to do with, you know, it's not a sexual, it's just being held and being hugged. And these dogs are the first things to give them that affection, and how it has changed some of the most hardened men in there to be these big gloved up teddy bears. And they interview the men and they follow them on their journey, and it's just so beautiful. And then, you know, it's beautiful for the dogs as well, because then these dogs have been trained, they're well behaved. And what happens most of the time is the dog goes to the family of the man in prison that worked with that dog. And when the man gets out, he gets reunited. And like, I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. And there's videos of the man getting out of jail and the dog's waiting there and the dog's so happy and the guy starts crying. And it's just beautiful. But I think it's just a great example of showing men aren't these cold-hearted don't want any affection or room to express themselves, they do. We just have to create spaces and a new conversation around what it means, you know?
It's
a beautiful program.
Yeah, but what you said then is really impactful, is that we need to create a new conversation, a new narrative in terms of, you know, in terms of mental health, in terms of men, in terms of mind, being more present. Yeah. Like, it gets back to that storytelling. Yeah. You know. Yeah. How can that, like, where do you see that taking place? Like, how can we start to really switch the narrative?
I'm a big believer in schools because your kids are there 5 days a week for a really, really long time. So I'm a big believer in that schools have a great opportunity to start shifting that. But I also acknowledge that you could learn something at school and then go home, and your family life is very different. So you're getting role modeled one thing at home, and then school's telling you something else. And that's where the power of the individual has to grow, and they have to get older and figure it out for themselves. I think we need to start having these conversations in schools. I have a real love-hate relationship with the media, with news, with magazines, with the online culture. I think we're getting better. I think we're starting to shift. But I think those conversations, you know, even something as little as when you see I don't buy magazines. I never buy any magazines at all, unless, you know, there's certain beautiful, really great ones, but, you know, I won't drop any names, but you can imagine which ones I'm talking about. Yep. You see them in the news, you know, at Coles or whatnot, and on the front it's 2 female celebrities, and they're wearing the same dress, and it's like, who wore it better? Why we teach this underlying sense of competition? Yeah, you know, why can't they both be beautiful and they're both wearing a beautiful dress? You know, so. You know, if I ever have kids, they will never, ever be looking at those types of magazines. I can assure you that. But the solution isn't simple. I believe we should start when they're young in school. That's kind of my impact, my solution, and how I'm trying to change things. But there are amazing books, amazing podcasts like yourself, where we are starting to have conversations that are different. But I often think, unfortunately, the people that need to hear it the most, or the people that need to learn it the most, don't go looking for this kind of stuff. You know, like, I'm always educating myself, reading books, podcasts, documentaries, but I'm already on this path.
That's it. And you know, I think there is a shift, and as much as, you know, like you get someone like Oprah, who I love, if someone who's completely, you know, not on the train, not on the journey yet, but they read something of Oprah's, and that is enough to get a little step in the right direction, then those people that can actually get an audience together, I think they're really important. Yeah. I think there's certain books that, you know, maybe wouldn't be what I would read, but it's a similar concept. But if people are reading it, like The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, for instance, like I'd take or leave the book, but if that's enough to get people
they're just stepping out on their journey,
then we need that.
100%.
I do completely agree that, like, what we consume we become, and when we read those magazines, when we watch the news and 8 of the stories are negative about that, then that becomes our thought process. That becomes 100%. What we think about. And that conscious consumption is so important in terms of being really mindful of the environment and who we are around and what we consume consciously and unconsciously. Like, just because we might not, we just think we're just going to numb out to New Idea or whatever these magazines are. That's us. Like, that becomes who we are, even though we think that it's just 100%. Junky.
You know, what we are, what we do every day, it becomes who we are.
Yeah, we watch The Bachelor or something and we see that competition for
that's an interesting topic. I used to love The Bachelor and The Bachelorette when I was younger, and this year was the first year I had maybe last year I had a total mind shift of this. And you know what? It's a bit of fun. It's a TV show. People are exhausted at the end of the day. They want to put something on that's going to make them laugh and chill out. Yeah. But at the same time, this, especially with the women and the bitchiness and the competition and the lies and the men acting all tough, and I just was like, oh, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
I didn't want to invite it into my subconscious.
Yeah,
I watched one of the first episodes, and I messaged my cousin, because we would always like joke about it, and I said, I don't think I can do it anymore. I think I need to protect my energy, and I don't want to open my energy up to any kind of negative undertones of competition and self-worth. And
well, you mentioned before we got on air and before we finished, but you went on a Vipassana retreat of 10 days, because we talk about that, not just the retreat and the meditation itself, but you get 10 days of complete disconnection and a complete almost reboot of consumption, and how that affects you mentally, physically, emotionally. Like, can you expand a little bit on what that journey was like for you?
So I've meditated for years, on and off. I have had more so lately a healthier relationship with meditation. And when I say healthier, I mean I've let go of like those myths of what it should be. And, a lot of people have a very particular image of what meditation is. So last year I found myself, as you said, a Vipassana meditation course, which for anybody that doesn't know is silence. And you go somewhere. You know what? You said retreat, but it was not a retreat. It was like the middle of the bush. It was freezing cold, sleeping on these little rickety beds that squeaked for 10 days. You're in silence for 10 days. There were about 60 people there, and you literally, there's no music, no phone, no television. You don't even get a pen and a paper to jot notes down. There is nothing external that you can rely on for the sake of completely going inward and going into your inner world. It was really hard for me. I think apart from a breakdown of a long-term relationship in my life, that and my Vipassana meditation retreat were the two hardest things we've ever done. It was... we were waking up at like 5:30 in the morning to meditate for 2 hours, then breakfast, then more meditating, then lunch, then more meditating. I think on average it was 8 hours of meditation a day. If you think that sounds crazy, I don't blame you. It was, it was pretty intense. But it was really beautiful though. You start to see everything differently. So we're out in the bush, it's beautiful. And I started noticing the lines in the leaves on the trees, like the most minuscule details. I started watching the direction the ants were walking in. I started listening to the different bird calls and the different songs that they were singing. I started feeling my body differently and having a different sense, like different... even having a shower, like a different sensation of my body and in the world. And you almost, by the 10th day, you start to feel like, and this is going to sound a bit woo-woo, but I honestly started to feel like I was floating a bit because your senses are just so tuned into what's going on. There's no distraction and I'll never forget, I was working still while I was doing this, so I could only take like 10 days off work. I got back on the Sunday night and I had to go and do a seminar Monday morning in the city. And I'll never forget, I got off the train and the noise of the city hit me so hard I actually felt dizzy. And it was like my body was like, what are you doing to me? This is overload. This is too much. And I remember walking through the city and feeling so disconnected to my body and almost maybe feeling like I was having like an episode of something, I was, but on the 7th day of the Vipassana meditation, I couldn't do it. I was like, I'm done. This is ridiculous. And there are two teachers, the two Buddhist teachers, and you can really only talk to them, but you can only talk to them if it's dire. And I spoke to the woman and I said, I can't do this anymore. I want to go home. I'm done. And she was beautiful. She was like this 60-year-old woman. She was like the epitome of peace and calmness. And she just looked at me and she said, Kate, is this the Kate who you are right now? Is this version who you want to be? And it just hit me. It was just like, because I was sitting on the floor. I was crying. I was feeling sorry for myself. It was self-pity. It was, this is too hard. And, you know, she said, is this who you want to be? And I was crying so uncontrollably. All I could get out was no.
Yeah.
The word no.
Yeah, okay.
And she said, well, pick yourself up and go back into the meditation hall. And, you know, some people might think, wow, that was really uncompassionate of her, but it was the most compassionate question. And I got through that day and then was very proud of myself that I completed that course. And yeah.
Most people I know that have done silent retreats have this sort of idealistic view of what this will be like. And
gosh, it's so hard.
Yeah,
it's not peaceful.
Yeah, and a lot of people go from it from a very low base of spending time with themselves, spending time in that. So they're going from sort of nothing to everything, which is again.
I relate it to if you're not a hiker and you go hike, you know, something in Nepal or something. You know?
That's right. You sort of there's no training.
I have to say, before I went on this course, I was probably only meditating like 10 minutes a day. Some days not. If I was, who knows what I was doing. I got to a point where maybe I was meditating for 40 minutes. Maybe once a week or something, so I could sit in silence for 40 minutes. But going and sitting, like the shortest block was 2 hours.
Yeah.
It was hard.
Yeah.
And not just mentally, physically.
Yeah, that's
physical. That probably was the biggest shock. I expected mentally and emotionally for it to be quite challenging, but physically the pain in my body that showed up. And the whole point of Vipassana meditation is to not react.
Yeah.
It's about
sit with.
Yes, sit with. So, you know, sitting with extreme lower back pain and just sitting with it and actually feeling it lessen and loosen and disappear. And that's probably the biggest thing I took from that experience and have implemented in my life is that, like, this too shall pass.
Yeah. And
to just sit with it and let it pass, not react and resist.
And our suffering, you know, you mentioned a relationship before, but when we can create the space to lean into the suffering and not just avert it and push it away or not attach to something else to try to numb it out.
Yes.
There's so much for us to learn in that time where we can, if we've got the capacity to.
Yes.
And that's where I think, you know, Tibetan Buddhism and Mayan and Vipassana or whatever it is can teach us is that ability of when things get tough, let's explore the emotions and feelings that really override us. Yeah. And what can we take from there?
And to go full circle back to the work I do around emotions and teaching people to understand what's going on inside, I say the more you resist something, the stronger it becomes. The moment you let it in, the moment you open the door and say, hey, feelings, come on in. You can come sit with me. We can be friends for a moment, is the moment it loses a little bit of its control and it lessens. Yeah. So I guess, you know, you asked me before about how my year was. I think something I'm going to take into next year is not resisting.
Yeah, okay.
You know,
that's beautiful.
Like giving in, kind of surrendering. Yeah, surrendering.
I forget the book he wrote. There's a guy called Mingyur Rinpoche.
Okay.
I forget the book. I'll put it on the show notes. But anyway, he's a hugely popular Tibetan Buddhist master.
Beautiful.
And he'd been, you know, grown up, and he's got plenty of monasteries around, around Asia. But what he did is he went off and he did his own. So they do like a 3-year retreats. They do these long retreats, so 3 years, and he'd done like 4 or 5. Maybe 5 or 6 of those. He's only sort of late 30s.
Okay.
But then he decided to do a 3-year retreat where he went to cities where no one knew him.
Okay.
And wanted to experience it because so much of their culture was in these monasteries, these perfect settings, which you would have experienced, that they don't then get to apply
Translate
that into, okay, what's it look like in the city?
Yes.
So it's a really interesting book. But he describes that feeling, probably the best I've heard it. He describes that open awareness and our thoughts as if we're a guest house, and that our thoughts are guests.
Yes.
And that they're all welcome.
Yes, let them come.
And let them come in, and they all leave eventually. Some thoughts need more care and attention, just like some visitors do.
Yes.
But we need to welcome them in as well. But we
that.
also need to let them go when they need to go. And what you sort of mentioned was the good ones that we want to keep, they also need to go.
Yes.
So we can't
get attached to any of it.
That's what he spoke about, which I really like, because we have these things that we want to cling to, and we don't want that guest to leave. That guest must leave.
Yes.
But also the ones we don't want to come in, we can't close the door and say we're full, because they will come anyway. Yeah. And as you said, if we try to, they'll knock louder. Like they'll show up in
they
some
get stronger.
Other way. Yeah. So
I love that. I love that this is where we've ended up as
well.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. Okay, so before we leave the Grow Club, how can schools or people get in touch with what you're doing? So
they can hit us up on our website or just hello@growclub.co. But if you just Google growclub.co, because there are a lot of grow clubs that are around cars for some reason. So if you Google just Grow Club, some weird car mechanic stuff will come up. So just growclub.co. I'm sure I can send you some information. You can pop a link on. But we have I can send schools our brochure of like all our options, and we're very flexible in building and creating something specific to the school's needs as well. And you got some workshops coming up, do you? Yes, I have next year, and same name to your podcast actually, because I was playing around with the word us, and it fit into conscious. So something I'm starting new next year is bi-monthly networking workshops. But, forget what you think of what networking is. It's nothing like that old school business. It's for friendship, for business, or for romance, or if you just want to connect and have authentic communication. So that's coming up on the 2nd of Feb in Carlton, and they will be bi-monthly next year. And that's for anybody, so not just young people. You've actually got to be 18 or over to attend. Beautiful. So that's on our website as well. We need more connection. We do. Authentic connection, Kate, thanks so much. Thank you for having me. Love it. Beautiful. Okay, take care. So, that was Kate. It was a really fun chat. It was easy for me to host that podcast because she just was so relaxed and so natural and normal in what she was saying. We were happy to take the conversation anywhere. I really liked that we sort of spoke a bit about the importance of boys and, boys relating to their feelings. I think that's just a super important area for us to continue to grow and develop, and we need more kind-hearted and connected young men coming through that can show up with strength in vulnerability and can call their emotions and talk to them and lead from a place of heartfulness. So I'm glad we went there with that conversation. Again, if you would like to check out more of me, lukemclean.net or Luke McLean Mindfulness. Kate is at the Grow Club. So thank you, and until next time, that was Conscious Conversations.